I'm a food freedom dietitian.
As a specialist dietitian,
I'm a registered nutritionist, so here's the actual nuance from someone with a nutrition degree. Listen, I'm probably not what you'd expect from a nutritionist, but I dedicated an entire chapter to sugar in my cookbook.
Mainstream influencers love to wave registered nutritionist in your face to justify eating 3 meals a day, constantly snacking, and even dedicating entire cookbook chapters to promoting sugar. They use their title as a shield so they don't have to explain the biology. One of them went even as far as to tell doctors to stay in their lane just because they're recommending fasting and cutting carbs to try to help people to reverse chronic diseases.
as a specialist dietitian, I think more doctors should stay in their own lane when it comes to nutrition advice.
But what actually happens when you challenge that title with metabolic science? Recently, I brought the hard metabolic data to 2 big influencers in the nutrition space. I didn't attack them, I just pointed out the glaring flaw in their studies. Like the fact that their evidence against intermittent fasting, okay, and fasting in general, only shows people that were on a high carb diet. So they're testing people and they're studying people that aren't fat adapted. So if you're not fat adapted, then you're going to run into problems if you're intermittent fasting or if you're fasting in general, okay? You're going to run into problems if you're not fat adapted, because you're always craving these sugar spikes because you get the crash after eating sugar and then you want another spike after. Now, to be intellectually honest, maybe my comment just got lost in a lot of comments, okay? Because one of them in particular got a lot of comments, so maybe it just got lost. It could have just got lost in the sea of comments, okay? Sea of notifications they would have got. But it's interesting that they were active and that they responded to other people, but they ignored the hard science. Like, this is a classic appeal to authority, okay? They rely on the title, they can't argue the mechanism. They don't have a canned pure response for human evolutionary biology. The dangers of constant glycation, or what happens when your body's locked in a chronic anabolic chronic storage state. Let's jump into the science that they refused to touch. Before we look at the biology of human digestion, we have to look at the history. Where did the origin that we had to constantly eat starting first thing in the morning, where did it come from? It wasn't science, it was marketing. The myth that breakfast was the most important meal of the day was actually started by breakfast companies. In 1944, the makers of grape nuts launched a massive ad campaign pushing the narrative with the phrase, "Studies show." And who funded those studies? The cereal industry itself. Going all the way back to the invention of Kellogg's cornflakes. The goal was to sell cheap processed grains, not health. The science followed the money, not the truth, which means you've been sold sugar since childhood. When you peel back the marketing, you're left with a basic biological truth. Humans are not grazing herbivores. The conventional advice to eat 3 meals a day plus snacks to keep your blood sugar stable is completely disconnected from our evolutionary baseline. In nature, the only animals to eat constantly throughout the day are herbivores like cows and sheep, etc. They have specialized multi-chamber stomachs to ferment this plant matter. So we don't have these multi-chamber stomachs. Human stomachs are very acidic, akin to apex predators. We are biologically designed to consume highly bioavailable animal protein and fat, and then we rest. We are built for a cycle of feast and famine. But when you eat 3 meals a day plus 2 or 3 snacks as well, then you're basically eating like 5 or 6 times a day. Every small bite you take triggers an insulin response. When your insulin stays elevated all day, your body can't tap into the stored body fat. Let's look at standard medical physiology, okay? A primary function of insulin is to inhibit a process called lipolysis, okay? Which is the release of stored fat from your cells. When insulin is too high, your body is trapped in incoming fuel mode and can't switch to releasing stored fuel mode. By eating continuously throughout the day, you will never allow enough time for insulin to drop back to baseline. Carnivores and people on keto diets, they've messed up because you can't even graze on like meat and dairy all day either. Protein and fat still cause insulin to be released, just to a lesser degree. So they're still released to manage nutrient storage. So even if you're eating perfectly clean, low carb diets, you're still going to release insulin, okay? But the problem is you're going to release too much of eating too many times a day. So frequent snacking can cancel out metabolic benefits that you'd otherwise get because your insulin never resets. The fix is establishing a clear rhythm, okay? So eating like once a day or twice a day or 3 times a day at most. No, just a bite of this or emergency cheese. None of that stuff, okay? Every time that just like life gets mildly inconvenient, then people just rush for a little bit of cheese or a little quick emergency snack. No, forget about that. It's not about starving, it's about allowing your body to reclaim its natural rhythm of eating and fasting. Specifically, insulin inhibits an enzyme called insulin sensitive lipase. Every small bite you take triggers an insulin response, so you're never giving your body time to adjust and digest and relax, because you're going to trigger that insulin response from eating every couple of hours. Because you're constantly trapped in this state of digestion, you are completely missing out on one of the most powerful healing mechanisms humans possess, and that is autophagy. Autophagy is your body's built-in recycling system. It breaks down damaged cells, proteins, and organelles, clearing the way for cellular renewal and better function. But autophagy cannot happen if your body is constantly working to process your next snack, okay? So by following advice to graze all day, you are basically preventing your own body from healing at the cellular level, forcing it into a chronic anabolic state, meaning you are perpetually in a storage mode. So if our bodies are built for periods of fasting and cellular repair, why do mainstream nutritionists constantly flash studies on screen claiming that intermittent fasting and fasting in general is dangerous? When they brought the metabolic science to the comments, the creator ignored it, but others didn't. People are starting to read the data for themselves and realizing that the data doesn't match up. Now, to be fair to one of the influencers, she does admit that the one, Sophie, okay, that the study she uses has some positive findings, okay, for intermittent fasting. But pay close attention to how quickly she glosses over what those findings actually say.
So yeah, there are some positive findings for intermittent fasting.
The study she puts on screen explicitly states our findings suggest that intermittent fasting may decrease fasting insulin. She brushes past this as a minor positive finding, but lowering fasting insulin isn't a minor footnote. It is the most critical metric for healing metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance, yet she sweeps it under the rug, right? And basically pivots back to her narrative that intermittent fasting is bad. And when they build that narrative, they are completely ignoring the biggest variable in the room, which is what those subjects are actually eating. When clinical trials test meal frequency, they're usually testing people on a standard Western diet, which is highly processed and carbohydrate heavy. If you take a group of sugar burners and then force them to fast for 16 hours, yes, of course they're going to run into problems. And of course, the data is going to be messy. They're experiencing massive blood sugar crashes and intense carbohydrate withdrawal. They are measuring the physical stress of carbohydrate withdrawal in short duration trials before the subjects even have a chance to become fat adapted. In fact, much of what they call human nutrition science isn't science. It's theology. It is often a consensus panel of authority figures getting together and forming an overall opinion. These epidemiological studies are built on messy, self-reported data riddled with confounding variables. To hide this, scientists use statistical tricks like multivariable regression, essentially stacking mathematical adjustments on top of raw data to manipulate the results and their way to a conclusion that fits their biases. You cannot mathematically adjust for a person, okay, a subject, following a standard Western diet for the last 30 years. These studies aren't measuring the evolutionary baseline of fasting. They are measuring the physical stress of carbohydrate withdrawal. And think about the stress thing. That goes back down to baseline after 3 weeks. So we talked about this before, okay? Because you're creating more glucose, okay, at the beginning. But then when the enzymes go back down to baseline, okay, then your resting cortisol goes back down to baseline, okay? And again, it's not a stressful state just because it raises a little bit these hormones. Like they might talk about adrenaline or cortisol, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You need these hormones. Like my heart is under stress at the moment because it's beating. It's not chronically elevated. It's not chronically high. When they run out of scientific arguments, they resort to a highly manipulative, very specific tactic, weaponizing the term eating disorder.
Doctors have a higher than average risk of disordered eating. And I've seen a lot of examples of doctors who seem to be projecting their own disordered takes on nutrition to a really large audience.
But some people, like pregnant people, growing teens, older adults, people managing diabetes, anyone with a history of disordered eating, could do a lot worse.
Let's be crystal clear here. Eating disorders are a very real thing, but choosing to rest your digestion for a few hours is not an eating disorder. Saying no to a mid-morning spike of sugar is not disordered eating, basically, okay? And it's funny that she uses people like Jason Fung, okay? A real clinical doctor who uses fasting for people who have diabetes to overcome diabetes. So he actually uses that. He uses fasting to reverse type 2 diabetes and to save limbs from amputation. But instead of celebrating disease reversal, the mainstream industry tries to shame you for it. They want you to believe that by sticking to a baseline evolutionary path, okay, by sticking to that it's disordered eating. Or that, spiking your sugar 6 times a day is okay and is actually healthy and is not disordered eating somehow. Somehow that's seen as perfectly normal. Funny how it works. The ultimate irony is that fasting isn't just a new flashy technique. It's one of the oldest therapies around. And actually, even if you checked out my video, if you saw my video on epilepsy, you'd know that like the ancient Romans used to use fasting to treat severe seizures, okay, to control seizures, because they thought there was demons, okay. And when they lock people in rooms and lock people and abstain them from having food, then their seizures went away. And if you look at my lifestyle as well, I'm only eating like once or twice a day usually. And I've had a lot of epilepsy blackouts, and through following a low carb diet and through not eating constantly every couple of hours, then that's improved the epilepsy. And now I'm not having those problems anymore. You see, the ancient Romans didn't understand ketones, and they didn't understand autophagy either. They didn't understand these things. They claimed the fasting starved out the demons. They said that those people were possessed by demons when they had the seizures. Today we know the truth. Those demons were misfiring neurons. And the fasting forced the brain to run on fat, stabilizing the nervous system. Ketogenic diet was invented 100 years ago to literally mimic that fasting state, okay? That ancient fasting mechanism. But today, dietitians want you to believe that by sticking to this historically proven brain healing biological baseline is disordered, while they push sugar and highly processed foods instead. When we constantly graze on carbohydrates, we keep our blood sugar and insulin constantly elevated all day long. This causes a problem because it causes what's known as glycation, okay? Where sugar molecules bind to protein and makes them not work well or not work at all. And the word glycation literally comes from the word sweet, the Greek word for sweet. When you graze on carbs all day, you're literally sweetening your own tissues. This rogue binding, okay, creates AGEs, or advanced glycation end products. AGEs cause oxidative stress. They stiffen your blood vessels, they age your skin, and most importantly, they drive insulin resistance at the cellular level. The mainstream nutrition industry is actively promoting the very glycation that keeps people sick and on medication. It makes sense that fasting feels restrictive and stressful if you are running on sugar and carbohydrates. But there is a way out of a chronic anabolic state. When you fuel your body with highly satiating animal proteins and fats, a profound metabolic shift happens. You become fat adapted. Your blood sugar remains beautifully stable on its own. You don't need to constantly snack because your body remains genuinely nourished on a cellular level. Your pancreas finally gets to rest and your body can enter autophagy to heal. Fasting doesn't become a forced, stressful diet protocol. It just happens spontaneously. The mainstream will keep hiding behind their titles and dedicating chapters to sugars. But here in Healthier Now, we talk about the truth. We focus on the mechanics of human biology. If you step out of the chronic storage state and learn how to actually heal your metabolism on a carnivore diet, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments below if you've noticed how much easier it is to go hours without eating, sometimes even days without eating, once you cut the carbs out. Stay strong, stay fat adapted, and I'll see you in the next video.